may take a seat.
Well, it's great to be here. I think I have. Yes? While that's happening, I have a teacher's voice, so I'll get to the back room. I was just going to say, this is my first time at your venue, change of venue, and it's fantastic. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, yes. It's okay. I feel like a puppet.
Sound team.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll fill in my form at the end of the service. I was going to say, it's just great, though, because you're right in the middle of everything, aren't you? You know, like you just look around and there are people everywhere, and they're also semi-curious about what's going on in here. So I just think what a great opportunity you have here, particularly after the service, to meet people who might be wandering past or would like a coffee or that sort of thing. So fantastic to see the setting that you're in here. Well done for those who managed to work out how to swing this deal to come to the Lawn Bowls. I just want to go through a couple of things about Engage Work Faith, which you may not know. So if I just show these slides for a few minutes, a couple of minutes, it will just explain a little bit about what Engage Work Faith is. Now, if you put up the first slide, oh, it's there. Okay. So basically, we had to work out if we were going to help people in the workplace. It went well beyond. It went well beyond sort of just sort of setting something up individually in each church around South Australia. So we decided to try and put this ministry together and had to work out its vision. And its vision basically is we say we exist because Jesus wants to transform all of life, and that has to include people in their workplaces and where they are day after day. And the reason that I think this ministry exists is to stop Christians from switching off when they move from one setting to another, that they're the same consistent person of integrity and in their discipleship and their witness wherever God puts them. So we just happen to be focusing on work in this case because it's a needy area. The second slide along there shows you a little bit about, sorry, I'll just move in front here, a little bit about some of the things we do. It's not an event-driven ministry, but we do a couple of things through the year where you can bring your friends who are Christians along and hear a thing tackled in a way where the gospel gets highlighted and they can see, your friends can see how it connects. Now, the one we've got coming up, which is, it's sort of, you're going to laugh about this, but, you know, beer proof that God loves us. It's actually a night to show people how a person can be a brewer in a place like Cooper's Brewery and run that business and yet at the same time be a person who's sold out on Jesus. So it's an unusual combination and it's a very easy invite. So if you want to come to that or bring someone to that is probably more the thing, that would be great. There are other things we're doing through the year, but basically that's probably a highlight thing to think about. We just did a conference on conflict in the workplace, and that was last weekend, and those talks will be up on our website. And if you're a person who you find at various seasons in your work life, oh my goodness, you know, the team is toxic or whatever, these talks are really worth going back and having a look at, particularly if you need them. The clinical psychologist was brilliant who came. We had a biblical setup for the day to understand what the Bible has to say about conflict, and then we finished with Q&A from people asking their questions about conflict in the workplace. So well worth looking at. If you just go to the next one, this is an event that we're doing in March. It's mainly a women's event, although I wouldn't restrict it to that, but it's basically hospitality is a huge way to actually reach out to people. And when Christians are hospitable, it really stands out. And so we're doing an event to help Christians think about what are they doing when they're inviting people around for a meal or for drinks or to go out for the night or shout them something. So it will be quite a comprehensive training to think about what are you doing with hospitality and how can you actually glorify God through it. And I think that's it. The next slide just tells you how you can connect with us if you want to use that QR code, or come and see me afterwards. Okay, all right, the advertising is over. Let's move on to look at this topic of securing rest. Some of you who were here 18 months ago may vaguely remember that I came and talked about God's view on work. And if you're at the start of the year, many of you, I bet, will be sitting there in your moments of reflection, asking that great existential question, why am I working? And the reason we ask it at the start of the year is because we've got the whole year folding out before us yet again. Why do I work? It's such a great question, particularly for the Christian. And the last time I was here, I talked about how the Bible says God set up work to be good, that we're designed to work, but it's also a painful thing. It's a frustrating thing because at the end of the day, we become dislocated from God, from one another, and from his world. So nothing works the way it should. But God addresses that dilemma. He sends his son Jesus to work. Jesus comes into our world, and at the cross, he declares the work that he came to do finished, and his work is to get us back to life in paradise the way we were intended. And his resurrection is proof that that reversal is beginning to happen. So the great point of difference for Christians, I think, is how we work. But today we're going to have a look at rest, because work, rest, they sort of sound like they go together. And we need to think biblically about work and why God has, about rest and why God has put it into our lives. And I think it's one of the great themes of the Bible to actually get us rest and restore us to a place of rest, which was great, set up very well by the band today with our last two songs. So God secures rest for those people who turn to him. And we're living in a world that's hurry sick. I mean, maybe the next generation down are trying to not be quite as busy, but technology alone gives us such an enormous capacity. We can do more and more and more. And Christians often reflect that. We do more and pack more into our weeks. And we do that with ministry as well. Let me tell you, as a person who's been in ministry for many years. Dr. Peter Adam is an Australian preacher, but he also goes around and he writes and he mentors. And after 40 years of doing this with people in ministry and going to churches, he's made this uncomfortable observation of modern church culture. He says, we may love God deeply, we just don't know how to sit with God anymore. We may love God deeply, but we just don't know how to sit with him anymore. Now, I ride my bike into the city each day, and I have a choice on the way home to go two ways. I can take a detour, and a couple of times a week I do this. I do the return trip through the West Terrace Cemetery. The first thing you notice when you do that ride is after a few minutes, everything becomes quiet. The peak hour disappears and the rumble of the cars. And you pass the graves of people who have lived in Adelaide long before you. And as you go, hurtling past them, you realise some of those people worked hard, some of them didn't really put in that much, some had their dreams cut short, some loved passionately, other people were just purely tolerated by their friends and family. But what they all have in common at the end of the day is the dust of their collective hopes and lives lie in that place. And it's a great detour for me because it reminds me that, like them, one day I will be joining them. And on many of the gravestones, what's written is, you know what's written. What is it? Rest in peace. Rest in peace. It's their collective hope. Now, the topic of rest, it warrants a whole preaching series, Carl. So we've only got a short time to look at this today. But I want you to see how peace, resting in peace, is such a critical part of being a Christian. And so how we're going to do that is we're going to look at how Jesus secured rest for us. Then we're going to look at how being a Christian just every day is a type of resting before the world. And we're resting on somebody else's work, not our own. Then we're going to have a look at what threatens that rest and holding on to it. And the great warnings in Hebrews not to neglect resting. And then finally, the irony of struggling to rest this side of paradise. So let's go back, first of all, and think about Jesus entering our world and walking this earth. He juggles work and rest. I don't know whether you notice this when you read the Gospels. In Mark 4, they're in the middle of a storm. They're trying to hold their act together, and Jesus is in the bottom of the boat, absolutely exhausted, fallen asleep. He teaches on rest in Matthew 11, and he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I'll give you a few more jobs." No, he says, "I'll give you rest." And then he has these radical claims in Matthew 12 where he says, "I'm Lord of rest. I'm not just telling you some ideas on rest, I'm the Lord of rest." And that last claim, that's the tipping point for the religious leaders of the day. And that's when they begin to plot his death in John 5. If you really want to understand what sort of rest God holds out, it all culminates when we get to the cross of Jesus. That's where rest gets forged. How does dying on a cross make Jesus Lord of rest? Well, if you read the accounts of the crucifixion, you'll see pretty soon that Jesus is writhing, he's calling and shouting out. This is no peaceful, quiet moment of slipping away in a hospital ward. Why is it like that? Why is he so restless? Well, I'm really thankful to Tim Keller for his insight on this particular part of the gospel story. He alludes back to Isaiah chapter 57, verse 20, and this is what it says: "The wicked are like a tossing sea, which cannot rest, whose waves cast up mire and mud." There's no peace for the wicked. The wicked are described there as restless people. On the cross, Jesus takes up all the wickedness, all the restlessness, all the sin. And there he is writhing on the cross. He is experiencing infinite restlessness, the collective restlessness of humanity, cosmic restlessness. Why? Well, because he's securing our rest at this point. He goes through utter turmoil and then says, "It's complete. It's done. It's finished. No more doing. No more wrestling." This is a very curious way to describe yourself as a Christian sometime. Have a think about this, because you might be able to use it when someone asks you. You say to them, "I rest not on my works, but on someone else's. I rest on the utterly perfect and finished work of Christ. God accepts me not because of my track record, but because of his." Christians are rest assured. Rest is something that is secured outside of ourselves. That's our big point of difference. In contrast, the world is struggling to rest. One of the dangers of technology, and more recently COVID, is the acceptance of working from home. And that, I know it has some advantages, but from what I can see, work and rest have been pressed together in this sort of strange confection. And what that means is we never quite leave work when we're at home. We never have that separation. Work is ground into a fine powder that sprinkles its dust through everything we're doing. There's no definitive break. We need to have a recalibrated work mindset. So Christians, we can be thermometers and we just simply reflect the temperature of what other people think about restlessness and so on. But we can be thermostats as well that set the temperature on this topic. Because we've got a group of people out there who think that their Medal of Honour is longer days, busier work hours, overpacked diaries, chronic tiredness, and whenever they're asked how they are, they say busy. Now, in Alex Pang's book titled Why You Get More Done When You Rest, he says the research says we do far better work when we've actually had a bit of a rest. We're far more creative, far more reflective, far more healthier. Without rest, there's no chance to think through where you're going in life, what sort of a friend you are to your mates, what sort of a mother you're becoming. Now, I know this principle of you need to take a rest from something like the gym. When I'm doing a combination exercise, and I repeat it 3 times, I have to time the rests because I'm sort of thinking I've got to get off to work, and I want to rush the whole thing. But no, you have to rest, because if you don't rest, the exercise becomes increasingly ineffective because your body and your muscles haven't had a chance to recover. And nature defines that principle for us in so many different ways. If you're a bit of a, veggie gardener here, you'll know how great it is to let one bed have a rest, a veggie bed have a rest, and lie fallow for a season. Because it can't just keep producing all the time. Think about, if you're a cook, how you get the lamb out of the oven or the barbecue or whatever it is, and you put it on the table and then you let it rest, because you want all those juices to go back in and for it to be, and then you serve it. We know that sort of difference in our life of the importance of rest in one breath, but in another way, we just run headlong into a life without night, day, seasons, the rhythm of the week, and the whole thing is just some constant twilight blancmange that we live through. Kevin DeYoung, in his book Crazy Busy, points out that, that we get 2.5 hours less sleep on average than our counterparts a century ago. That's how much we've eroded out of our lives. Theologian Don Carson lists sleep deprivation as one of the 6 causes of people's doubt in God. Maybe for you today, the best thing you can do when you go home as an application of this sermon is go home and have an early night. Psalm 127 says, "In vain you rise up early and go to bed late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." Grants sleep to those he loves. When you go to sleep, you admit that you can't keep the world spinning. You say, it's just going to have to be looked after by God till I get up tomorrow morning. I take my part again. More than just struggling, the world is actively trying to erode the rest that you may have in Jesus. I don't know whether you can see that. Last year I realised, the year went very quickly, but last year I realised I've been a Christian for 50 years. And it's been a long trek and a very satisfying one so far. The book of Hebrews in the New Testament depicts the Christian life as this big, long journey, a trek, with a goal at the end of reaching God's rest. Now, it does that in Hebrews 4 that we had read, verses 1 to 11. If you have it on your phone or you have a Bible there and you can have a look at this with me now, it's actually trying to draw a parallel. The Old Testament people of God were rescued from slavery. They had a shocking life in Egypt in the end, where they were working 24/7. And God led them out of Egypt and promised them both peace and a place of rest. And it was a dangerous journey. They had to go through wilderness to get to where he wanted them to be. And these people wavered in their trust of God's promise that he would give them a home and give them rest. And that prolonged their unhappy journey along the way, and it resulted in a whole generation of them dying in the middle of the wilderness en route. Now, what's the point of retelling this story to Christians who received the letter of Hebrews thousands of years later? Well, in a wave of hostility, there was a new thing called Christianity around, and when the Roman Empire started to apply the blowtorch, it was much, much easier if you were a converted Jew, that is a Hebrew, to sort of go back and retreat under the umbrella of Judaism again. Because at least, it was tolerated in the Roman Empire. Might take the blowtorch off you temporarily. But what the writer of Hebrews is saying here in Hebrews 11 is that if you did that, it would be a denial of everything that Jesus had won for you. In the end, you would stop resting on what he did for you and you go back to relying on your own efforts and achievements. And that thought was a pastoral nightmare to the person who wrote Hebrews. So Hebrews 4 unpacks three things about rest that are worth remembering here, and they take you far beyond the Israelites who are wandering in the wilderness. The first is this, that God's rest existed before there was even a promised land on view. Before it was a thing, in verses 3 and 4 there. So it was there at creation. God's rest remained after the promised land. Because it says in verse 6, it still remains for some to enter that rest. And then verses 9 and 11, it says that rest is still open to the believer today. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So what Hebrews is doing is it's equating ultimate rest with entering God's kingdom in the future. Otherwise, if they'd received it, when Joshua took them into the promised land, it'd be all finished. But it isn't. It's still to come. That rest of completion that God proclaims at creation is what he's longing for people to have in full one day. We get it in part after Jesus died on the cross, but we will have it in full. We have the deposit of God's Holy Spirit in our lives now, and that part holds us to the future that we're hanging out for. You think about how we do this in life generally. This is how we work and keep motivated. It's often the thought of a holiday that will keep you pinned in a difficult place right now. It's the thought that the weekend's coming that will get you through a hell of a week. It's the hope of ceasefire talks that help people sustain themselves through a war. Isn't it? It's the holding on to the hope. It's the part that holds you to the fullness at the end. And that delayed gratification is what Hebrews impresses on us. The pursuit of eternal rest is costly. It's like you're going on a pilgrimage. You're going on a journey where the disciple at the end of their days will cease from their labours just as God did from his in Genesis 1 and 2. Andrew Delbanco in The American Dream, he says, hope is the way we overcome the lurking suspicion that all of our getting and spending amounts to fidgeting while we wait for death. I've said that to a couple of my gym buddies. Because what are we hoping for? Just sitting there fidgeting and waiting for death. There is absolutely no question that for you, if you are a Christian, you have a complete rest coming your way. So you hold on to that hope. How does that compare with your current picture in your head of rest? I don't know. What do you think of when you think of the word rest? Maybe it's a deep soaking bath for your tired muscles, or a deserted beach fringed with shady palms, or a crackling fire in the middle of winter with the wind howling outside. Whatever it is, Whatever it is, you'll know what it is. You know what it is, because what you say is, when you're in that situation, resting and enjoying that, you say, heaven. You just can't help yourself. Tim Keller describes that feeling as a deep inner machinery wired in our DNA, constantly murmuring for eternity. God's picture of rest eclipses what we often settle for and what falls short of our expectations. And C.S. Lewis put it like this. He said, "We're half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday by the sea. He's far too easily pleased." Hebrews' picture of rest is costly. Becoming more like Jesus is not just sort of, holding on and flopping over the finish line and collapsing. The word strive there in verse 11 is used to describe the intense concentration of someone that's necessary, that they need to apply to themselves to get to their desired goal. And it begs the question, what sort of things have you done that over in your life? Maybe you've had to pull out the stops to do a renovation and live through all the mess. Maybe you've met someone you thought, I want to marry that person one day. Maybe you've tried to start a family and you think we'll get there in the end. Or maybe you see that job that will be the game changer. You think once that happens, life will completely change for me. Striving for the inferior thing can be exhausting because the goalposts keep moving all the time with these things. They squeeze more out of you. How do you know if you have a drivenness that's flawed? Well, there's a couple of diagnostic questions you could ask yourself. Do you check your work emails and your phone messages long after you said you've knocked off? Do your family say to you, we don't see you? Do people preface their request to you by saying, oh, I know you're a very busy person? Is that how you want to be remembered? Do you have enough time to pray for yourself? Do you pray for your children if you've got them? Do you stop to eat together at least once a day with other people? These are some of the measures, I think, that are worth looking at. Life teaches the dangers of neglecting rest. You end up with shallow relationships, health risks, addictions. And Hebrews is just taking that negative result of human beings failing to take proper physical rest and applying it brilliantly to a spiritual failure. It warns us not to miss out on appropriating God's ultimate answer to human restlessness. So, verse 11. Look at what it says again. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. Day by day proposition here, hour by hour, trusting, resting on God's promises until he takes you home. It's being captured by that vision and not letting lesser visions, flawed visions, airbrush that vision out. It's choosing rest, ultimate rest over restlessness in your life. How can you secure that sort of rest? Well, keep working at it with other Christians. We don't talk enough about this with each other. Brainstorm with some other Christians. Are you resting? How are you doing it? How are you putting work in its place? What are the distractions that keep your eyes off the future as a Christian? How do you keep yourself from being overwhelmed with what you're doing? Start practicing real rest now. It's not enough for you to work like a demon and then take time off. That's flawed. That's like, university exams. It means maybe having fewer goals, not trying to have it all, maybe saying no to something. One person said to me that the reason they can say no to the many requests they have at their church for things to do, and they're all good, is they remember that they've said yes to something else before this. Make yourself accountable when you get into a busy patch in life. You know, life doesn't always have a nice rhythm where, you know, every day has, 10 hours of sleep or whatever it is. But, and that's because we have patches in life where we really have to gun it and do things. So if you're starting a new business, or you've got a new role that you've got to get your head around, or you're doing some particular project and you know it's going to require overwork, for 18 months or something, then you say to someone else that you love and trust, when we get to the 18th month mark, if I'm still doing this, please come and tell me, because I don't want what I'm going to be doing for the next 18 months to become the normal pace of my life. The other thing you can do is build unstructured time into your life that's unplanned, that's not in the diary. Just time where you give your body, soul and mind a chance to freewheel, and things can sort of bubble to the top of the surface. Several years ago, I had to preach at a service in the city where the Governor of South Australia was a guest, and it was after the Eyre Peninsula bushfires, which were particularly devastating, and it's a long time ago now. I told you I've been a Christian for 50 years. But anyway, it was horrific, and there was loss of lives, and this governor turned up at the service and sat in the front row where I was preaching on that morning. And while I was preaching, I realised that they were starting to sob. I thought, oh, goodness, what have I said? So after the service, we had this little space between people greeting them at the door, and I just said, I noticed that you were quite unravelled there for a few minutes when I was preaching. What was it that I said? And she looked at me with confusion and said, wasn't anything you said. It's just it's the first time I've sat still in the last 2 weeks, and it's all sort of came rushing on me. Well, there's an unhelpful drivenness in human beings to validate the space we occupy in the universe, isn't there? Here's my justification for being here. Here's my badge of what I've done. It's a wearing task to live like that. We never know whether it's quite enough. We keep proving ourselves to ourselves. We prove ourselves to the people we love. We prove ourselves to even our enemies at points. But there has to be a better way, and there is. And as that song said, it doesn't have to wear your fingers down to the bone and re-enslave you. Am I truly resting on what Jesus worked so hard to secure? You know the story Jesus told about the man who had the bumper crop, and he went out and he, built those bigger barns. I don't know how he did it overnight, but he did in the story, to store his harvest. And what most of us think when we hear that bit of the story is we think, wow, what a hard worker. What does Jesus say? What an idiot. What a fool. Striving needs to be focused properly on the right things. Entering that rest that Jesus secures for us at the cross, you appropriate that, you persist to get that in your life, you focus, you don't slip back into an inferior and flawed offering. As Christians, we need to be people who advocate rest. I mean, we should be out there, and we have a point of difference to the well-being movement, who often only want people to be well so that they can keep working. It's an outworking of how God liberates you, and you want people to know that. Well, a while ago, I helped a mate move down to Victor Harbour. He's a marine biologist, and as a thank you, he took me out very early in the morning to Petrel Cove to fish. I don't know how to fish. It was my first serious fish ever.